Hello, my name is Lisa Wolf with the Center for Humanistic Change, and welcome to our current drug trends presentation for middle school students. This is intended for students in grades 6 through 8. I want to take a moment to thank Lehigh and Northampton County Divisions of Drug and Alcohol because it's their funding that allows us to provide this program to you at no charge. So I want to stop and ask first, why do you think people take drugs? And really, we're referring to taking legal drugs for an illegal use or using illegal drugs themselves. I'll give you a minute to think about that. So these are the things we see most commonly when we talk to people who either use drugs or who are in recovery from drugs. Bottom line is drugs make us very often feel good or high. You know, it's something that we enjoy, and I'll get more into that why they make us feel that way. Feel better. It's often a coping mechanism for people who are in physical pain, but also often in psychological or emotional pain. People with mental health issues often will abuse drugs and alcohol because it does help them to feel better, at least in the short term. Help us to do better. Drugs like Adderall, Ritalin, or cocaine, those are stimulants. So if we can stay up longer, they help us concentrate more. So some people might use it to get schoolwork done or get their work done. And especially at a young age as teenagers or adolescents, the age you guys are, it's curiosity. Other people are doing it. It's natural to be curious about it. And I hope I can give you a very good explanation today as to why, especially at your age, you should not be doing any kind of drugs. First, I'm going to share a video. These are all people that are local from the Lehigh Valley that have been involved with drugs and alcohol, and they're going to talk about their first use, why, how, what they were using, and then we'll talk about that when that's done.
I started using drugs at age 11.
I started experimenting with drugs when I was 15 or 16.
I can remember my first drunk.
When I was around 14 is when I started drinking.
It was a bunch of friends together, normal hanging out. One of my friends had vodka, drank it, got drunk.
I was about 13, give or take, freshman in high school, when I first smoked marijuana and started drinking.
It was that adrenaline, that feeling of out of control. And immediately it was, what's next?
The first drug I ever tried was marijuana.
I started taking hallucinogens.
I started with just smoking weed and hanging out with the older kids, and because I didn't have friends growing up really, so they were my friends.
Always hung out with older people. Always was introduced things younger from older people.
Just for the fun of it, because other people, other kids, kids that were a little bit older than me, they did it, they had a good time.
I started smoking weed when I was probably 13, 14. Was from a neighborhood kid who was older, who I hung out with, and we were bored.
He had struggled with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression for a long time following my husband's death from cancer.
I would drink with my friends.
Didn't know what it was. Tried it, liked it. It was a outer body experience, adrenaline, something different, something to take me out of myself.
He just fell into addiction, I think, to self-medicate his depression.
I drank more than they did, though.
I didn't realize at the time that, when they were done getting high and using these drugs, I wanted more.
We pretty much got along with everybody. It was a small school, so everybody knew everybody. But, we found someone that was willing to let us have it. We tried it out, and kind of one of those things, fell in love with it right away.
And I didn't understand that was a red flag at the time.
I always looked for acceptance, and that was one of the reasons that using was so easy for me, because everybody else was doing it and I wanted to fit in.
Really get hungover from marijuana, alcohol, you kind of fight your way through that where, all right, I just make sure I won't do that again. And of course you do, and then you hit the I'll never drink again, this is horrible, and you do. So it was always a reoccurring thing.
Everyone would be having fun, but I would always be the one that got, too drunk.
It was mainly on weekends. I played sports all through high school, so it was on football game on Friday, party Friday night, practice Saturday, after practice party. and then, you recover Sunday, go back to school and do your thing.
I was involved with friends who were using other drugs that weren't as quote-unquote serious, Xanax, smoking weed, prescribed pills from them and their families in school to try to just get through the day. It made it more fun, more bearable.
Ultimately, while he did pass from heroin, it was sort of luck of the draw. It could have been almost any substance that can be lethal.
Okay, so what I think you saw, or hope you noticed, was the ages they started. So the one boy talked about drinking alcohol at 11. His drug use escalated very quickly into marijuana and even heroin at the age of 13, which is extremely unusual, but it happens. But if you notice the ages, it was between about 11 and 15. So right in the age group you guys are in. And that is the most common. Usually it's about 13, 14 is the average age of first use for people who are going to do drugs. And they started with alcohol, marijuana, and pills. They might have talked about other drugs too, but those are what we see people most often start with. And I think you would agree or understand it's because alcohol is accessible. Also, marijuana is very accessible. And then starting in the mid-90s into the early 2000s, even now, these different prescription drugs that people like to get high on were more available. So you can understand why those drugs would be the ones people would start with. I'll talk about the attitudes we have towards those drugs as we go on as well. And then there's the why did they? So for some, it was not being able to fit in and hanging out with the kids who were using with some people who accepted them, and it was a way to fit in. It was kind of the thing to do. The one guy talked about sports, so he was, year-round in sports, year-round, football, wrestling, and baseball. So he was hanging out with a group of kids that were doing that after the games or on the weekends. The mom who talked in the video, her son James started to deal with depression at the young age of 10 when he lost his dad. By 12, he was hospitalized for depression, and he used drugs until he died at the age of 18 to cope with that emotional pain that he had. And trust me, she did everything she could to try to get him help, and it just wasn't successful. He really, really suffered throughout his teen years. So, and then there's the other people are doing it, why not try it? And that is what you might come upon as you progress through middle school and into the high school. There's probably going to be a time when you're going to have to make a decision. Do I do this or not? So I'm going to give you a little bit of background that I hope will help you understand why the answer should be no. So when we talk about addiction, we have to talk about the brain. And one of the most important parts is the basal ganglia. So this is in the back of your brain, and these are where habits are formed. So think about if I tell you say the ABCs, chances are you're going to sing your ABCs in the way you learned because it's so ingrained. If you learn to tie your shoes with rabbit ears, chances are that's how you still tie them and always will. And if you didn't, you tie it the other way. So when we start a habit, it's not just something we learn. There is a physical change in the brain. There are pathways made in the brain, which is why habits are so hard to break. And that's often how drug use will start, as a habit. Another important part of the brain to talk about is the nucleus accumbens, or the pleasure center. This is what really keeps people addicted. So when you take something or drink, let's say you drink alcohol, you smoke marijuana, you take some of these medications, that goes into your system and it goes to that center part of your brain, the pleasure center, and releases dopamine. And dopamine is what makes you feel good, feel happy, feel content. So you might get that feeling from playing sports, playing music, being with your friends, whatever it is you enjoy doing, you get dopamine release from that too, which is what motivates you to want to do it again. Drugs do the same thing, but they are much more efficient, much better at it than that natural production. And if you picture the dopamine release with let's picture a toddler, like a little kid, right? and nobody's watching. So they are climbing the bookshelves and they're playing with the toilet paper and dragging it through the house and having a good old time and no control. That's kind of what goes on in that part of your brain. But there is another part of your brain that helps you put those brakes on and stop. So it would be kind of like the caretaker or the babysitter, and that would be the prefrontal cortex. So this is the part of the brain that helps us make better decisions, stops that behavior, that little toddler in your brain having a good time saying, you know, you're going to get hurt. This is not a good idea. You know, you don't want to be doing this. But here's the thing. Your nucleus accumbens pleasure center is operating really well right now. It's mature. Your prefrontal cortex, however, the part that helps you stop behaviors that could be harmful, even though they feel good, does not fully develop until 25. So you guys have a lot of brain development to go. So if you think about over the past 2 weeks, I am sure every one of you have done something that someone in your life, or even you said this to yourself, like, what was I thinking? Why did I just do that, right? It's a reason that you're less likely to think through the consequences of a behavior. You just kind of go for it. And certainly when somebody tries drugs for the first time, I don't think anybody thinks, you know, I'm going to do this and I'm probably going to get addicted. We don't think it's going to happen to us. You know, you think you can try it a few times, but for some of you, that first time is going to be the beginning of a whole lifetime of struggle. And that's why if you just delay use, so if you delay drinking until you're 21, if you don't try marijuana until you're 25, the chances of addiction plummet. The chances of it becoming a problem in your life go way down. So it's starting in your teens that makes you a much more risk, first of all, for, you know, having things go wrong in your life, but also setting you up for a lifetime of addiction. So, you know, I think it's good for you to think about what are your goals in life? Who do you want to be? What do you want to be? Because these decisions you make now, you're not making them with a mature brain, and you might make the wrong decisions. It's so important to have an adult or a few adults in your life that you can talk to. And it may not be mom and dad, but there's teachers and coaches and counselors and pastors and all kinds of people in your life who really do care. So if you're going through something and thinking, you know, this might be the answer to my depression or my anxiety or my boredom, or because I can't find friends, you know, talk to somebody who's older who can really help you work through that, because the decision you make at 13 or 14 could end up following you through the rest of your life. And I hate to see that happen to any young person. So just to wrap up this thing about the brain. So this is the LA freeway system, right? So it's got different levels and it's going in all different directions, and it's bringing in traffic from all different parts of the city. What if an asteroid landed right in the middle of that freeway system? It would collapse. It would be broken. People would die. It would interrupt the flow of traffic from all different parts of the city. Could it be fixed? It could. Will it ever be the same? Probably not. So now picture this as your brain, because your brain is creating all these different pathways. There are all these connections being made with the neurons in your brain. Your brain is undergoing a tremendous amount of growth as an adolescent. It's very, very busy in there. And if you put drugs in there, now drugs would be that asteroid that fell in the middle of the freeway system, you are going to change the structure of your brain, change how your brain functions. You actually could destroy parts of your brain. And if you do stop, you know, if people stop using drugs, their brains will repair. But for some people, they won't ever be the same. It depends on what you use, how long you use. So, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into that. But we want you to take care of that adolescent brain because it has so much more maturity to go through. And you are just so much more at risk at your age. So addiction or substance use disorder, which is what we now call it, that's what SUD is chronic, meaning it's ongoing. No one is ever cured of addiction. They can live a life of recovery. About 24 million people in the United States alone live a life of recovery. But when someone is in the midst of addiction, they are constantly seeking drugs. It becomes number one in their lives. It's all they can think about. They can lose their families, their jobs, their friends. Everything falls apart around them. And the drugs drive their whole lives. So remember that pleasure center, that dopamine rush, basically that part of the brain takes over. And, it's almost like it can't get enough. Feed me, feed me, feed me, that drug, that pleasure, right? So we now treat drug addiction as a disease. It is not a matter of willpower. It is not a moral failing. You are not a bad person if you become involved with drugs. We all make decisions at some point in our lives without thinking through consequences. And, not ever think, nobody says when I grow up, I want to be an addict. You don't think it will happen to you, but there is a chance it could, especially if there's a history of addiction in your family, or you have issues with mental health like anxiety or depression. So the drugs actually change the structure of the brain and how it works. So that's why we now take an approach of treating it as a disease. For some drugs, there are medications that are used to help you get off those drugs. For the most people, though, it's therapy, counseling. Some people do 12-step programs like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, or Narcotics Anonymous. Whatever you choose, there are very different ways of approaching it. But people can live a life of recovery, but it's not easy. And it is a lifelong commitment. So, the way to avoid that is to not get involved in the first place. So here's the bottom line. Anyone can become addicted to drugs. Me, you, mom, grandma, your cousin, your nephew, whoever it is. There is no stereotypical person who uses or becomes addicted to drugs. We now recognize it can happen to anyone. And I beg you to have some compassion and empathy towards people who struggle with addiction, because they usually feel pretty bad about themselves. And for the most part, it's really hard for them to get under control. But providing, the opportunity for them to talk or to seek out help and say, I'm there for you. And if you are struggling yourself, to reach out to someone and ask for help. It is there. It's there. And I want you to keep that in mind. Before I get into talking about all the different drugs, I just want to mention addiction to social media, video games, and cell phones. This is a very real thing, because when you are playing a video game with friends, and so it's a social interaction, or you win in the games, or you are posting on social media and you're getting those likes and those follows, you are stimulating that same dopamine production in the middle of your brain, the feel-good chemical. And it's addiction to a behavior rather than the drug. And people really do get hooked. So if you find yourself spending hours doing this, or it affects your mood, like if you don't get a lot of likes, you feel sad. If you don't have as many followers as your friend, you get depressed. Just check yourself, because these things often go hand in hand with drug addiction, but you can be addicted to digital devices and social media and video games. You also can be addicted to gambling. There's other kinds of addictions. So just be aware, because for your generation, this is a big part of your life, and you don't want to interfere with your life. So I'm going to start out by talking about nicotine and vaping devices, because this has become a huge issue, especially with young people. So in the beginning, they advertised these devices as a way to quit smoking. So adult would buy something with a refillable tank. So it might look like the one on the right, or it might have looked more almost like almost like a cigarette, but much thicker. with a refillable tank. And the idea was you'd start out at a high nicotine level and bring it down because you were filling it with this e-juice, had different levels of nicotine, and eventually you would quit. Did some people quit this way? Absolutely. Did a lot of people go just from cigarettes to still vaping? A lot of people did. So they're just replacing it with another product that still is not healthy. But also what happened is they started to market to young people. Remember, the goal would be for them, they want you as a customer with your developing brain. By marketing to young people, they get you when you're younger and more likely to become addicted, and they got a customer for life. So I just want to point out some of the differences. So things like the Juul or the Swarn, the Enjoy, they're all pod-based, and they contain salt-based nicotine, which is very smooth, makes it a more pleasurable feeling. It doesn't really hurt your throat. The bigger tanks, make that bigger cloud, but they also are a little rougher on the throat. There's a lot more nicotine in the pod-based devices, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that has a refillable tank, whereas a Juul, you're made to throw them out and not refill them. I'll talk more about that in a minute because the laws have changed around those. But I want to point out the amount of nicotine in pod-based systems like the Juul or the Swarn. Very high nicotine. So a pack of cigarettes has about 200 puffs. So there's 20 cigarettes, they're each about 10 puffs, okay? So 20 times 10, 200 puffs. In those 200 puffs, you are getting about 20 milligrams of nicotine. In a Juul pod, also 200 puffs, but twice as much nicotine. In a Fix, which is just another device, about 200 puffs, but almost 4 packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine. And then the Swarn pod, again, 200 puffs, but 4.5 packs worth of nicotine. There is only one reason to have those high nicotine levels, and that is to get you hooked. Doesn't make it taste better, doesn't make it smoother. It is to get that nicotine into your body so you can't stop. Now, some of the laws changed recently. So it used to be you could buy Juul pods or Swarn or Enjoy pods and many flavors. Mint was the most popular, but they had mango and vanilla and all these flavors. And in February, they made those flavors illegal. They cannot be sold. Pods can no longer come in any flavors except tobacco and menthol. Now, there are ways to get around it. You can now buy empty Juul pods online and then buy the juices and refill it, because the juices that come in a bottle or disposable pens like the blue, you might see them like in gas stations or convenience stores where you don't recharge the device, you use it and then toss it. They still can be sold in a variety of flavors. So there are a lot of loopholes there. One other thing they did is they did change the age from 18 to 21. So, hopefully that will keep these things out of the hands of younger people, because nicotine is not good for you. I'll talk about that more in a second. But they raised it to 21, so we are kind of keeping it out of the hands of younger people. So here is the bottom line. Nicotine is a drug. It is classified as a drug. It's a stimulant, which means it revs up your system. It makes your heart beat faster. It raises your blood pressure. Highly addictive. They classify nicotine with heroin and how hard it is to quit. If you've ever known anybody who tried to quit, you have seen what it's like for them. It is extremely hard. It causes a change in your brain chemistry, like I talked about earlier. It changes the brain and how it functions. So even knowing nicotine is unsafe, people, once they start, they cannot stop. You can start to feel physically dependent on nicotine in just a matter of days, especially with these high nicotine levels in pods. So you guys have learned a lot about cigarettes. You might not remember it, but you have learned there are thousands of chemicals in cigarettes. You have seen the warnings on cigarette packs. You've had it pounded through your head that, that cigarette smoking is gross and dirty. Cigarette smokers are often stigmatized. They have to go outside to smoke. And that's why very few teens smoke cigarettes anymore. And when these pods came around, we didn't really know what was in these e-juices, but now we do. And these are some of the chemicals that are in e-juices. There are 300 to 400 is what I have heard. So many of them are dangerous, harmful. The ones that are going to come up in orange are thought to be or known to be harmful. Things like lead, which is a heavy metal, the formaldehyde, which is used to preserve dead bodies, acetone, which is a nail polish remover. So, these are things you are inhaling into your lungs when you're using vape. And here's the other thing. We call it vape because it reminds us of steam, water vapor, heated water, right? But it's not. These are chemicals, and it's an aerosol. So, if I spray water in a water bottle, that's just hydrogen and oxygen. It is going to evaporate. It doesn't leave anything behind. It doesn't hurt anyone. If I walk in here with a can of hairspray and start spraying that, that's an aerosol. It is going to leave chemicals behind. You're going to know it was in the room because it's going to make surfaces sticky. You're going to smell it. Aerosols leave particles behind. So if you would inhale steam, and some people do that, if you have asthma or bronchitis, sometimes you inhale steam, it helps open up your airways. It's not going to hurt you. It leaves nothing behind. But if you are constantly inhaling this aerosol, it's leaving particles in your lungs. So we don't know long term what these things do, but we do know that they're dangerous. You cannot be putting those chemicals into your lungs, into your body, and not have consequences. So they call it vaping, but it's really not. It's aerosoling. So I just want to point out the flavors. This is what made them so popular with teens, okay? And I mentioned earlier the pods like for Juul and Enjoy. You can't buy them in any of these flavors anymore, but the bottles on the top left are still around. You have to be 21 to buy them. The disposables, the cherry limeade in the middle there, or the ones in the bottom left corner. But I'm telling you, they are all high in nicotine. They are all very addictive, and they all contain those chemicals that are bad for you. And I remember I said this before. Most people who smoke or vape start before the age of 18. And yeah, it's illegal for them to buy it then. But as I know, that when people really want to get things, they figure out how to. I'm begging you not to, because if you start at a young age, you're going to regret it. It's going to be hard to stop. Ask anybody who may have smoked cigarettes or vape, and they will tell you, quitting cigarettes or nicotine in general it can cause mood swings, make you tired, make you more quick to anger. Some people can get depressed and they'll quit 100 times and keep coming back because it's just so hard. So, I know it might be something you think you might just try, but some of you, if you do try it, will become dependent. So now I'm going to go into the other drugs. So this drug, if you see some of the things up here, is a very commonly abused drug by people, especially young people. And I'm talking about marijuana. So this is tough because there's a lot of casual attitudes towards marijuana. It's become very socially acceptable in a lot of areas. Some states have made it legal for recreational use. Most states have made it legal in some form for medical use. But I just want to point out, especially at your age, where this can be an issue. So you have the leaf marijuana in the bowl on the bottom left, and also leaf marijuana on the right that goes into a vaping device. That is bud or leaf marijuana. In the 1970s, the THC, now THC is the chemical that makes people feel high. The THC levels in that were about 4%. They weren't very strong. People were not getting high out of their minds. But as marijuana became more popular and, some of the laws were relaxed a little bit around it, people started to grow different strains. And now that type of marijuana is 15 to 30% pure THC, much stronger. When we start talking about the waxes or the oils, which you would vape, like in the middle, THC levels in there are a lot higher. And this is the big concern. This is much more popular. This is the stuff that is really going to get people stuck in an addiction. People say you don't get addicted to marijuana, but I've seen it. People go through withdrawal when they don't have it, and at the very least, it's a psychological addiction. No one's ever died of a marijuana overdose, but people have been hospitalized because these high THC levels can make them very paranoid, anxious, and even sometimes lose touch with reality, which is called psychosis. So here, like I just said, very often it's aerosol or vaped. You might hear people talk about carts or cartridges. People buy it as an oil inside of the cartridges and put it on one of those batteries. And as it says there, the high can last for a long time, and the THC concentration is often extremely high. So dabbing, also related to the oils, very much the same. So you can see it has, it says average of 80% THC concentration. That's extremely high, extremely high. Remember I said 4% in the 70s, now we're talking 80, 90% pure. The high is different. Bottom line is we don't have much research on this. We have not done longitudinal studies where we follow people through the years, but we're starting to do that. And there is just no way you can be putting a chemical into your brain that makes you so high. There's no way it's not going to have an effect on you as you get older, especially if you start as a teen. You are going to interfere with that brain development. We have seen, though, in some people that they've studied, it affects their ability to learn, their memory. They can lose IQ points. Your brain is so precious, and you need it, right? So please, I would beg you, at least wait. If you try weed when you're 25, first of all, chances are it'll be legal. And also the risk of addiction and you becoming dependent on it go way down. The damage to your brain would be less because your brain is fully mature. I'm not saying it's okay to get high. I'm just saying, especially at your age, you have to be so careful with the things you put into your body, okay? I also do want to point out, you might have heard last year, a lot of people were getting sick from vaping. They were getting a lung disease. About 60, 70 people died from it. They seem to think most of that was related to vaping marijuana. Some of it could have been vaping nicotine juices, but I think nearly all of them involve people inhaling marijuana oils. Also, edibles. They're not legal in Pennsylvania, but they come in from other states. They might be in a candy form or a brownie cookie. Can be extremely high in THC. It's easy to take too much because you don't feel the high right away. So I would advise you to stay away from these types of marijuana forms. I just want to mention medical marijuana is legal in Pennsylvania. The two components of a marijuana plant are cannabinoids, or CBD, and THC. The THC is what gets you high. The CBD is what has a lot of the medical properties. Although there is often THC, and there can be relatively high levels of THC in medical marijuana, I still would not recommend it to you as a teen. It's been used mostly by older people for arthritis and other kinds of conditions, but at some point in your life, someone may need medical marijuana, and you have to weigh the risks and benefits of using any drug, including this. Hookah, I don't know if it's popular where you are, but it has become popular in a lot of communities. People get the impression because there's that water in that bowl that it's being filtered or something. I'm here to tell you that tobacco you use in a hookah, no different than the tobacco in a cigarette. Extremely high levels of nicotine. The reason one of a hookah is like 100 cigarettes is it's very social, so you're doing it over time. It's not like you'll have a cigarette and come back in the house and don't smoke for 2 more hours. You're also inhaling everybody else's smoke, so you're getting that secondhand smoke. Bottom line is, it's not good for you. It's got high levels of nicotine and it's got carcinogens that cause cancer. It's a fad. Avoid it. Some young people, you might have heard about this in rap music. Lean or propylene is usually the slang we hear. This would be drinking cough syrup by the bottle or taking many, many, many of the cold pills. You might have heard it called triple C, coracine, cold, and cough. You might think it's just something that's in my home, or I can go buy at the CVS or Walgreens. So how could it be bad? It can. People have overdosed on this. It is not safe. And even though you might hear about it in rap music, it is not a safe way to get high, and I recommend you do not fool around with this. Also, what we see with some, especially middle school age, would be inhalants. So this would be things like gasoline or nail polish remover, some kind of glues that make you feel dizzy, or things like an aerosol can like Pam, or where you have whipped cream. There's a gas in there that makes it come out as a aerosol. It's sometimes called huffing or whippets. Again, you think these things are in my home. How could it be bad for me? If you are intentionally inhaling those things, they can cause damage to the organs. They can even cause you to die. So if somebody thinks it's a good idea, I suggest you tell them, no, not a good idea. It really can hurt you. Now, alcohol. This is always a tough one too. Alcohol is very much a part of our culture. If you watch football games on a Sunday afternoon, you are exposed to a lot of beer commercials where people are all having a great time. And, most people can drink responsibly, but some people can't. And especially if you start at a young age, your chances of struggling with alcohol are, go up as opposed to waiting until you're in your 20s. It alters you. It gets you in trouble with the law if you drive while you're intoxicated. So for an adult, for anybody, a drink is defined as 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or a shot of liquor. So an adult male can consume 5 of those over 2 hours, an adult woman 4 of those over 2 hours, and that will make their blood alcohol 0.08%, which is the level that you are too drunk to drive. However, if you are not 21 and you are stopped and they breathalyze you, just a 0.02, you'll get a DUI. So that could be a beer. You might go to a graduation party when you're a senior in high school, have a beer, you don't feel drunk, but you might blow that 0.02. And if you get a DUI before you're 21, you can lose college scholarships. It can affect which career you can be. If you get arrested with relation to alcohol, teaching jobs, other things are just, those doors close. You lose your license till you're at least 21. You pay a lot of money in fines. You have to be so careful. And you don't know how alcohol affects everybody differently. You don't know how it's going to affect you. You must be very, very careful with alcohol consumption. If there's a history of alcoholism or addiction in your family, might choose not to ever use it. So what we see that one of the biggest issues is binge drinking, especially on college campuses. And binge drinking is, people drink a lot of alcohol in a short period of time, often involves shots of alcohol. And what that happens is it suppresses their breathing. So they might fall asleep and just never wake up. Or else sometimes what happens is people will vomit. If they're on their backs, they choke on their vomit. So you need to be aware of these things, because you might get yourself in a situation where you're with friends and they're drinking. And what if you notice they can't talk, or they don't wake up, or they stand up and fall down? If you need to call for help, and you might be afraid to, especially if you're underage yourself. So they have a Good Samaritan law where if you call for help, call 911, you remain with that person till help comes. They cannot charge you or your friend with any kind of underage or crime if it was an illegal drug. So they started to do this because a lot of people were abandoning their friends because they were so afraid of getting arrested. So don't ever abandon someone. If you think someone's in trouble, don't be afraid to call. The ambulance people, the police officers would rather you save a life. They're not there to get you in trouble. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you get older. Also, alcohol use over a long period of time can cause damage to absolutely every organ in your body. I've seen what it does to people. It's a horrible thing to watch, very sad, but that's what can happen to people who become addicted to alcohol. Synthetic drugs, I'm just going to address these very quickly. Molly or ecstasy, it's a party drug. You might have heard that in some music or rap videos. Flakka is kind of like the bath salts people used to talk about. And Spicer K2. You might never have heard of any of these. Some of you might live in communities where there's a big issue with Spicer K2. The bottom line is these are all synthetic, which means they are man-made. You have no idea what is in these things. Nothing. No idea. It's a bunch of chemicals. They all will make you more awake, but especially the Spice K2 and the Flakka can make you very aggressive, anxious. You might not sleep for days. And usually the way people overdose on these things or die from these things is they all make your internal body temperature go up. So you might have a fever of 106, 107, and that's going to kill you. It's going to shut your organs down. So they can be extremely dangerous. And I just want to make note that acid, LSD, which are hallucinogenics, these things are starting to make a comeback. A lot of consequences for the brain and the body. You got to be so careful, and you don't know what people are giving you all the time either. So taking drugs from someone is a whole other risk category. Illegal stimulants include cocaine and meth. So on the left, on the top, it's crack cocaine. On the bottom is the powdered cocaine. Very popular in the 80s among wealthier people, celebrities, people on Wall Street, but it ruined a lot of careers. Some people died from it. It was very expensive, so they lost all their money to it, and use went down, but it's back. It's making a comeback on college campuses. It is very addictive. It can ruin your body, your brain, your life. And then meth, also a stimulant, has even worse consequences. So it's either inhaled, but often it's smoked. They'll take those crystals and they light them in a pipe and smoke them. And you can see what happens to those girls' skin. Meth makes people become hyper-focused or feel like there's bugs crawling in their skin, so they'll pick at it. They don't sleep for days, which damages the brain in itself. The decline can be very quick. The teeth will get rotten. They'll get really skinny. These are nothing to fool around with. They can be very dangerous drugs. Prescription medication. So we've seen a rise in these use of these drugs, Xanax, Adderall, and Ritalin, and painkillers. So yeah, I'm going to go through these one at a time very quickly. But we see people abuse these even at your age, and you must be so careful. So Xanax, lorazepam, Ativan, these are drugs usually prescribed for anxiety. If you have anxiety that's so bad it's interfering with your life, you may have to go to a doctor. You may need some of these medications. However, you have to be so careful. You might hear people refer to them as bars or pillows or footballs. Some people, I don't know why, like to abuse these. It makes you basically a zombie. These things are extremely addictive. You can also easily overdose. Everybody's different. If I might take 5 Xanax and I don't even fall asleep. You might take 1 Xanax and you overdose. Everybody has a different system, a way of their body metabolizes these drugs. But they are extremely dangerous also if they're mixed with alcohol. We see a lot of overdoses from that. ADHD drugs. If you have ADHD, these drugs help you calm down and focus. That's okay if it's prescribed for you by a doctor. However, if you do not have ADHD and you take these drugs, they make you more hyper, they speed you up. And some people like that feeling of being more awake or having more energy. But then when you don't have it, you might feel tired and depressed, and it can be very hard to get off of these things if you abuse them. And then painkillers. So these are opioids, Vicodin, Oxycontin, Percocet, hydrocodone, Demerol, Tramadol. These are used, really should only be used after a surgery or if a very traumatic injury, cancer pain, or if people are dying, especially older people, they might have a lot of pain. However, they are sometimes prescribed for things like tooth extractions or, things that you really don't need this level of painkiller. So if you go to a doctor and they want to prescribe something like this, you're allowed to ask questions. For some people, it just takes one pill and they are hooked on these things. These drugs have ruined a lot of lives, and I would beg you to be very careful if they're prescribed to you, but also not to fool around and take them to get high. It's not worth it. Absolutely not worth it. And then heroin is related to opioids, basically does the same thing. Heroin is an illegal drug, but it relieves pain, but makes you feel high. So you might be aware that people might inject heroin with a needle. Now, that's what you see in that picture in the middle, but people sometimes sniff it or smoke it. And you need to know that it doesn't matter how you take it. It is addictive in all forms and deadly in all forms. Two telltale signs that people are abusing opioids are teeny tiny pupils. So most drugs make your pupils big. These make them small. And then nodding out. You see that girl, it's kind of like people become like a rag doll, kind of fall over. It is not that difficult to overdose on heroin. So if you ever are with someone and you can't wake them up, you think they might have ingested something, I beg you again, remember, call for help. You might save a life. So what if someone's overdosing? I already went over this. I'll just review it quick. You call 911. Even if you're high yourself, you are protected by the Good Samaritan law if you call 911 and remain with your friend until somebody comes. If you know CPR and can do it and their heart stops, go for it, right? Also, if you or someone you know is going through something, drug use, depression, eating disorder, self-harm, Safe to Say is an app you can use on your phone. There's other ways to use it. I'm sure you guys have gotten to talk about this in school. It's an anonymous way of reporting somebody that you're concerned about, and it doesn't matter what it is, and it's not ever going to get people in trouble. It is to get people help. You can report yourself, or you can report a friend. Parents can report someone. It really is a good way of catching things. If we catch them early, your chances of recovery are so much better than if it would go on for years. It's a lot harder to stop things when they get so far. So don't be afraid to use your app. And then you also have a SAP team, Student Assistance Program, and you can report at school. There's usually forms in the guidance office that you can fill out. Again, it's anonymous. You do not have to put your name on it. You just put the name of the person you're worried about, and it sets in motion a process to get that person help. It is not about punishing. And it's not just about drugs. It's about depression, anxiety, self-harm, any kind of issue. Maybe somebody's parents are getting divorced and they're struggling. There's help out there. Don't be afraid to ask. Reach out. So last but not least, if you have a question about anything I said on here, you can email me. I'm happy to address it. You can also go to our website. For middle school students, we also have a vaping presentation and one called Choices, Chances, Changes. And that is specifically around opioids, the prescription painkillers and heroin. That's really more just for 8th graders. But knowledge is power. Knowing about drugs and the dangers they cause is a good thing. Thinking about what you're going to do if you are ever approached by someone offering you drugs, and maybe doing a role play with an adult about how you're going to handle it helps. Okay? Don't be afraid to talk about these things. We care about you. There are a lot of people out there that care about you. We just want you to be safe and healthy. So thanks again for watching the presentation, and you have a great day.